Diane Vance had always known she was different. Not in the way that inspires movies or motivational speeches, but in the quiet, painful way that settles into your bones during middle school and never quite leaves. At 37 years old, standing in the marble-tiled bathroom of her custom-built home in Charlotte, she could still remember the exact moment she learned that her body was something to apologize for. She was 13, wearing a swimsuit at a pool party, when she overheard two boys laughing about how she looked like a whale. The memory was so vivid, she could still smell the chlorine and feel the hot concrete burning her feet as she ran inside to change. But Diane had learned something crucial over the years. If you cannot be beautiful, you can be brilliant. If you cannot be desired, you can be indispensable. If you cannot turn heads when you walk into a room, you can own the room instead. By the time she turned 25, she had transformed a modest inheritance of $75,000 from her late father into a thriving real estate development company. By 30, she was worth $3 million. By 35, $12 million. Her company, Vance Property Development, had become one of the most respected names in Charlotte's commercial real estate market, known for transforming struggling neighborhoods into vibrant mixed-use communities without displacing existing residents. She had built an empire, but she had built it alone. Relationships had always been complicated for Diane. There were men who approached her at business conferences, men who seemed interested, but she could never shake the feeling that they saw her bank account before they saw her face. She had tried dating, of course. There was Robert, who always suggested they stay in rather than go out. There was Andrew, who never introduced her to his friends. There was Kevin, who asked to borrow money on their fourth date. Each failed relationship added another brick to the wall she built around her heart. Another piece of evidence that proved what she had always suspected. She was unlovable as she was. Then, 5 years ago, everything changed. She was attending a real estate development conference in Atlanta, sitting alone at a corner table during the networking dinner, scrolling through property listings on her phone to avoid the awkwardness of eating alone in a crowded room. She sensed someone approaching and looked up to find a man standing beside her table, holding 2 glasses of wine and offering one of the most genuine smiles she had ever seen. "I noticed you've been working through dinner," he said, his voice warm and slightly hesitant, as if he was genuinely nervous. "I thought you might need this more than the rubbery chicken they're serving. I'm Marcus Bradford, by the way. I work in commercial property management." Marcus Bradford was objectively attractive in that effortless way some men are. He had dark hair that fell just right, warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and the kind of confident posture that came from someone who had never questioned whether they belonged in a room. He was 30 years old, dressed in a well-fitted navy suit, and when he asked if he could sit down, Diane felt her heart do something it had not done in years. It hoped. They talked for 3 hours that night. Marcus seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking thoughtful questions about her development projects and sharing his own experiences managing commercial properties across the Southeast. He laughed at her jokes. He maintained eye contact. He did not check his phone once. When the conference ended and people began filtering out, Marcus asked for her number, and Diane gave it to him, already preparing herself for the disappointment of him never calling. But he did call, the next day, and the day after that. Within 2 weeks, he had driven from his apartment in Atlanta to Charlotte to take her to dinner. He brought flowers. He held doors. He listened when she spoke about the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry. He seemed, in every possible way, too good to be true, and that terrified her. Because Diane had spent 32 years learning that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. After their fourth date, as they sat in her car outside her house, she could not hold back the question that had been burning inside her chest since the moment they met. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Does my appearance bother you? I know I'm not. I know what I look like. I just need to know if that's going to be a problem." The silence that followed felt eternal. Diane kept her eyes fixed on the dashboard, unable to look at him, bracing herself for the polite rejection she had heard so many variations of over the years. But when Marcus finally spoke, his voice was soft and steady. "Diane, look at me, please." She turned her head slowly and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite name. "I think you're beautiful the way you are. But even if I didn't, do you know what would matter to me? Your character, your principles, your heart. The way you light up when you talk about building communities instead of just buildings. The way you remember the names of every server and doorman we encounter. The way you're brilliant and driven and kind." He reached across the console and placed his hand gently over her heart. "One day, we're all going to be old and wrinkled and gray. Our bodies will fail us. Our looks will fade. What's going to matter then is what's in here. And what's in here is extraordinary." Diane felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. In that moment, sitting in her car in her own driveway, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found the man she would marry. Someone who saw past her insecurities. Someone who valued her essence over her appearance. Someone who understood that love was about who you are, not what you look like. They were married 11 months later, in a beautiful ceremony at a historic estate outside Charlotte. Diane cried for an entire hour during the reception, overwhelmed by a happiness she had never believed possible. She had found her person. She had found someone who loved her for exactly who she was. For the first 4 years of their marriage, Diane worked tirelessly to be the perfect wife. She supported Marcus through 3 failed business ventures, writing checks without complaint when his commercial property consulting firm lost money, when his investment in a boutique hotel collapsed, when his cryptocurrency trading left them $60,000 in debt that she quietly paid off. She tolerated Linda Bradford, her mother-in-law, who made subtle comments about Diane's clothing choices at family dinners, who suggested Diane might want to try intermittent fasting, who always seemed to look at her with barely concealed disappointment. She never complained when Marcus spent long afternoons at his mother's house, or when Linda called at 9 at night to discuss financial concerns that somehow always ended with Diane writing another check. When Marcus asked her, 3 years into their marriage, if they could modify their prenuptial agreement, Diane hesitated for only a moment. The original prenup stated that, in the event of divorce within the first 5 years, Marcus would receive nothing. He presented it as a gesture of trust and commitment. "I want you to know I'm not here for your money, Diane," he had said, holding both her hands across their kitchen island. "I want this marriage to be based on complete faith in each other. Let's remove the prenup entirely after 5 years. It'll show we're truly in this together." His eyes were so sincere, his voice so earnest. And Diane, who wanted desperately to believe she was loved for herself and not her bank account, signed the modified agreement. The prenup would dissolve completely after 5 years of marriage. After that point, in the event of divorce, assets would be split according to state law, potentially 50-50. She told herself it was romantic. She told herself it meant he truly loved her. She told herself that her lingering doubts were just old insecurities trying to sabotage her happiness. She had finally found someone who saw her worth, and she refused to let her own fears destroy it. Then came the night that shattered everything. It was a Wednesday evening in October, 14 months before their 5th anniversary. Diane had come home early from a site visit, exhausted from a long day of negotiations with city planners about a new mixed-use development project. The house was quiet when she entered through the garage. Marcus's car was in the driveway, but she did not see him in the living room or kitchen. She assumed he was in his home office on the 2nd floor, probably on another call with his mother, something that happened with increasing frequency. She kicked off her heels in the hallway and padded in her stockinged feet toward the bedroom to change into comfortable clothes. As she approached, she noticed the bedroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the hallway's hardwood floor. She could hear Marcus's voice, muffled but distinct, speaking with an animated energy she rarely heard anymore when he talked to her. Her hand hovered over the doorknob, something in his tone making her pause. She should have knocked. She should have pushed the door open and announced herself. Instead, some instinct she could not name made her stand frozen in the hallway, her hand suspended in air as her husband's words drifted through the gap in the door. "Mom, I'm telling you, it's unbearable." Marcus's voice was sharp with disgust. "That fat elephant disgusts me. When I see her naked, I have to close my eyes and imagine I'm somewhere else. I'm only in this for the money. You should see the way she eats. It's repulsive." Linda Bradford's high-pitched laugh crackled through his phone's speaker. "Well, darling, you've been very patient. When do you finally get access to everything?" "Soon." There was a smile in Marcus's voice, the kind of satisfaction that came with a plan nearing completion. "I've been patient for 4 years, Mom. The prenup expires in 14 months. Then I can file for divorce and walk away with half of everything. Probably more, if I play it right. She's so desperate for someone to love her that she doesn't suspect a thing. I've already spoken to that attorney you recommended. He says with the right strategy, I could potentially get 60% of the assets, especially given that she signed that modified prenup. It proves she was willing to share everything equally." "And what about that girl you've been seeing? The trainer?" "Ashley doesn't know I'm married. I've been careful. Once I'm free from the elephant and have the money, I'll upgrade properly. Someone actually attractive this time. Someone I can show off instead of hide." The words fell on Diane like stones, each one precisely aimed at her deepest vulnerabilities. Every beautiful thing Marcus had said to her that night in the car, every promise about loving what was inside, every gesture of affection over 4 years, had been a calculated lie. He had identified her greatest insecurity and weaponized it. He had made her believe she was loved, when all along he was just counting down the days until he could rob her and discard her like garbage. Diane took one step backward, then another, her hand still frozen in the air where it had been reaching for the doorknob. The hardwood floor was cold beneath her feet. Her chest felt tight, airless, as if someone had reached inside and squeezed her lungs. But she did not cry, not yet. She was too shocked for tears, too busy processing the magnitude of what she had just heard. The man who promised to love her for who she was inside had, in reality, been pretending to tolerate her while plotting to steal half of everything she had built. She moved silently down the hallway, her stockinged feet making no sound on the floor. She went into the guest bathroom and closed the door with careful precision, then sat on the closed toilet seat in the dark, her hands shaking so violently she had to clench them together to make them stop. He called her an elephant, a fat, disgusting elephant, and his mother had laughed. Everything began clicking into place with horrible clarity. The failed business ventures that she had funded, the modified prenup he had pushed for so earnestly, the increasing amount of time he spent with his mother, probably strategizing, the way he had stopped initiating intimacy over the past year, but made sure to maintain just enough affection to keep her unsuspecting. The way Linda's comments had become more pointed, more critical, as if she was laying groundwork for something. They had played her, both of them. They had identified a lonely, insecure woman with money and executed a long-term con with the patience of professional grifters. Diane sat in the dark bathroom for 45 minutes, listening to the sound of her own breathing. Gradually, the shock began to fade, and beneath it, something else emerged. Not rage, not yet, not even hurt, though that would come later. What emerged was something cold and clear and calculating. It was the same feeling she got when analyzing a failing property deal, the moment when emotion fell away and she saw the situation for exactly what it was, a problem. One that required a strategic solution. Marcus Bradford had made a crucial mistake. He had assumed that the desperate, insecure woman he married would remain desperate and insecure forever. He had assumed that she would never find out. He had assumed that even if she did suspect something, she would be too afraid of being alone to do anything about it. But most critically, he had underestimated exactly who he was dealing with. Diane Vance had not built a $12 million company by being weak. She had not survived in a cutthroat industry by being naive. She had not turned $75,000 into a fortune by making emotional decisions. She stood up slowly, turned on the bathroom light, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her with red-rimmed eyes and smeared mascara. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The woman looking back at her was not a victim. She was a strategist, and she had just been handed the most important information of her life, with 14 months to act on it. Marcus wanted to wait until the prenup expired to file for divorce and take half of everything she owned. He wanted to humiliate her, discard her, and walk away rich. He was counting on her remaining oblivious until the trap was already sprung. But now she knew, and he had no idea that she knew, which meant she had time. Time to investigate, time to protect herself, time to turn his own plan against him. Diane washed her face carefully, reapplied minimal makeup, and changed into the comfortable clothes she had originally come home to put on. Then she went downstairs and started dinner, as if nothing had happened. When Marcus emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, she greeted him with a smile and asked about his day. He kissed her cheek and complained about a property management issue he was dealing with, the same way he did every evening, as if he had not just been on the phone plotting to rob her blind. They ate dinner together at the kitchen table. They watched television in the living room. They went to bed at their usual time. And through it all, Diane played her role perfectly. The loving, unsuspecting wife who had no idea her husband found her disgusting. The naive woman who believed she was cherished for who she was inside. But behind her eyes, a plan was already forming. Methodical, comprehensive, devastating. Marcus Bradford thought he was the hunter, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike. What he did not realize was that he had just revealed himself to prey that had teeth. The morning after the worst night of her life, Diane woke at 5:30, as she always did. Marcus was still asleep beside her, his breathing deep and even, one arm thrown across his face. She studied him in the gray dawn light filtering through the curtains. He looked peaceful, innocent, like a man who loved his wife. The disconnect between what she saw and what she knew made her stomach turn. She got up quietly, went through her usual morning routine, dressed in one of her tailored business suits, and left for the office without waking him. It was only when she was alone in her car, driving through the empty pre-dawn streets of Charlotte, that she finally allowed herself to cry. The tears came hard and fast, blurring the streetlights into smears of gold. She pulled into an empty parking lot and sat there with the engine running, sobbing into her hands until her chest ached and her throat was raw. Everything he had said to her that night in the car 5 years ago had been lies. Calculated, perfect lies designed to disarm her. He had told her exactly what she needed to hear, had identified her deepest vulnerability and exploited it with surgical precision. The way he had placed his hand over her heart and talked about what mattered, the sincerity in his voice, the tender way he had looked at her. All of it had been performance. He was not just a cheater or a gold digger. He was a predator who had studied his prey and struck at exactly the right moment. But she could not fall apart. Not yet. Not when she had 14 months to protect everything she had built. Diane wiped her face, reapplied her makeup using the mirror on her sun visor, and drove to her office before any of her employees arrived. She sat at her desk in the silent building and began making a list in a leather notebook she kept locked in her desk drawer. Not on her computer, not on her phone. Nothing that could be traced or hacked or subpoenaed. The list had 3 sections: investigate, protect, execute. Under investigate, she wrote, private investigator, background check, financial records, phone records, Ashley, trainer. Where? How long? What else is he hiding? Under protect, she wrote, assets, company structure, real estate, bank accounts, prenup lawyer, estate lawyer, accountant. Under execute, she left blank. That would come later, once she knew exactly what she was dealing with. At 8 in the morning, Diane called Michelle Davis, her business partner, and the only person she truly trusted. Michelle had been with Vance Property Development since the beginning, when the company was just Diane and a dream and $75,000. They had built the company together, and Michelle knew Diane better than anyone. "Can you come to my office?" Diane asked when Michelle answered, "Now, and close the door behind you." Michelle arrived 4 minutes later, her face already showing concern. She was a tall woman with sharp features and sharper instincts, the kind of person who could read a room in seconds and a financial statement in minutes. She sat across from Diane's desk and waited. Diane told her everything, the conversation she had overheard, every word Marcus had said, the disgust in his voice when he called her an elephant, the laughter from Linda, the mistress, the timeline, the plan to take half of everything after the prenup expired. She recited it all in a flat, emotionless voice, as if she were reporting on someone else's life. When she finished, Michelle was silent for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled Diane into a fierce hug. That was when the tears came again. But this time, Diane allowed herself only 2 minutes of crying before she pulled away and wiped her face. "What do you need from me?" Michelle asked, her voice hard. "I need to disappear some assets, legally. I need to restructure the company in a way that protects everything I've built. And I need you to act completely normal around Marcus if you see him. He cannot know that I know." "He won't know," Michelle promised, "and we'll protect every single thing you've built. That man will get nothing." The first call Diane made was to Vincent Harper, a private investigator whose name she had gotten from a business associate 2 years earlier when another developer was dealing with embezzlement. Vincent was in his mid-50s, a former police detective who now ran a discreet investigation firm specializing in domestic cases and corporate fraud. She asked him to meet her at a coffee shop 30 minutes outside Charlotte, somewhere Marcus would never go. Vincent Harper was exactly what Diane needed. He was professional, direct, and utterly unsentimental. She told him what she had overheard, and he took notes in a small black notebook without any visible reaction. "How long do you want surveillance?" he asked. "As long as it takes to document everything. I want to know where he goes, who he sees, how he spends money. I want to know about the mistress. I want phone records if you can get them legally. I want to know if there's anything else I don't know about. And I especially want to know about his mother's involvement. That'll take time and money. I have both. And Vincent?" She looked at him directly. "He cannot know he's being watched. If he suspects anything, it ruins everything." "He won't know," Vincent said. "I've been doing this for 23 years. Trust me." The second call was to Richard Kellerman, a lawyer who specialized in prenuptial agreements and asset protection. She had never met him before, but he had a reputation as the best in the state. His retainer alone was $15,000. She paid it without hesitation. Richard reviewed her prenuptial agreement during their first meeting and delivered the news she had been dreading. "The modification you signed 3 years ago is legally binding. If he files for divorce after your 5th anniversary, the prenup is void, and North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. That means the court will divide assets fairly, which often means 50-50. Especially if he has a good attorney arguing that he supported you emotionally during the marriage, and that you both agreed to dissolve the prenup as a gesture of mutual trust. So what can I do? You restructure everything before the prenup expires. We move assets into business entities, trusts, family limited partnerships. We create a paper trail showing that certain assets were always business property, not marital property. We need to do this carefully and legally, but we need to do it now. 14 months is tight, but it's doable. What about the house? The house is in your name only, correct? You purchased it before marriage? Yes, with my own money. Then it's separate property. But if he's been living there for 4 years and contributing to household expenses, he could argue for some equity. My advice? Sell it. Buy something new that's clearly purchased during separation. Or better yet, rent temporarily. Remove the asset from the equation entirely. Diane felt a pang at the thought of selling her house. She had designed it herself, had overseen every detail of its construction. But the house was just a building. It could be replaced. Her dignity could not. Sell it, she said. The third call was to her accountant, Gerald Peters, who had managed her business finances for 12 years. She met with him and Richard together, and they spent 6 hours going over every asset, every account, every property. They created a plan to restructure Vance Property Development into a more complex corporate structure, with holding companies and subsidiaries. They would move her personal real estate investments into a family-limited partnership. They would document everything meticulously to show that these changes were for legitimate business and estate planning purposes, not to hide assets in anticipation of divorce. This is going to take months to execute properly, Gerald warned, and it's going to cost you a significant amount in legal and accounting fees. I don't care what it costs, Diane said. I care that it's done right. Meanwhile, Vincent Harper was working. Within 2 weeks, he provided Diane with her first report, and it was worse than she had imagined. The mistress was named Ashley Brennan, a 28-year-old personal trainer who worked at an upscale gym in downtown Charlotte. Marcus had been seeing her for 22 months, almost 2 years. He rented a 1-bedroom condominium in a building 6 blocks from Ashley's gym, using money he claimed was for office space for his property management consulting work. Diane had been writing checks for that office rent for nearly 2 years. The condo was where he took Ashley 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoon. Like clockwork, Vincent included photographs. Marcus and Ashley leaving the gym together, laughing. Marcus and Ashley entering the condo building hand in hand. Marcus and Ashley at a restaurant Diane recognized, one where Marcus had claimed to be meeting potential clients. The photographs were surgical in their clarity. Ashley was conventionally beautiful, in the way fitness influencers often are. Thin, toned, with long blonde hair and perfect teeth. Everything Marcus had implied did not matter when he placed his hand over Diane's heart and talked about character and principles. Everything he said he was looking beyond. But the worst part was not the affair itself. It was the timeline. 22 months. He had started seeing Ashley less than 6 months after he convinced Diane to modify the prenuptial agreement, which meant the affair had likely been part of the plan all along. Keep the unsuspecting wife content and unsuspicious, while he entertained himself on the side and waited for the prenup to expire. Vincent's second report, delivered 3 weeks later, revealed even more. Marcus had gambling debts totaling $187,000 spread across 3 casinos in Las Vegas and 2 online sports betting sites. He was making minimum payments using credit cards that Diane did not know existed, cards he had opened in his own name, but that he was paying with money diverted from their joint household account. The account Diane had set up and funded every month without ever checking the statements because she trusted her husband. The third report was the one that made Diane's blood run cold. Marcus had created fraudulent documents using 3 of Diane's commercial properties as collateral for loans from private lenders. Loan sharks, essentially. High-interest loans totaling $520,000 that he had taken out over the past 18 months. He had forged her signature on the loan documents. The lenders thought they had legitimate collateral. When Marcus defaulted on the payments, which Vincent's research suggested was imminent, those lenders would come after Diane's properties. This was not just infidelity and greed. This was criminal fraud. Marcus had not just planned to divorce her and take half her assets. He had been actively stealing from her, forging her signature, and creating debts in her name. And Linda Bradford knew about all of it. Vincent had surveilled several meetings between Marcus and his mother at Linda's house, meetings where they reviewed documents together, meetings where Linda handed Marcus envelopes of cash, meetings where they clearly discussed strategy. Linda had loaned Marcus $125,000 over the past 2 years, money she expected to get back with interest once Marcus secured his share of the divorce settlement. She was not just a supportive mother. She was an active co-conspirator, invested financially and emotionally in her son's scheme to rob Diane. Diane read through Vincent's reports in her office late at night, after everyone else had gone home. She read about the affair, the gambling, the fraud, the conspiracy. She read about how her husband spent his Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with his mistress in an apartment she was paying for. She read about how he had forged her signature, how he had stolen from her, how he had planned this betrayal with his mother, as if it were a business deal. And then she closed the folder, locked it in her safe, and went home to the man who had done all of this. She walked in the door and smiled at him. She asked about his day. She listened to him complain about a difficult client who did not appreciate his expertise. She made dinner. She acted like everything was normal. Because Marcus could not know that she knew. Not yet. Not until every piece was in place. At night, lying in bed beside him, Diane would stare at the ceiling and marvel at her own performance. She had become an actress in her own life, playing the role of the oblivious wife, while secretly dismantling everything he thought he would steal. During the day, she met with lawyers and accountants. She restructured her company. She moved assets. She documented everything. She built an impenetrable wall around everything she had spent 15 years creating. And Marcus noticed nothing. He continued his routine of seeing Ashley 3 times a week. He continued gambling away money from their joint account. He continued having long phone conversations with his mother behind closed doors. He continued playing the role of the devoted husband who was just struggling to find his professional footing, who just needed a little more support, a little more patience, a little more money. 6 months after overhearing that conversation, Diane had made substantial progress. The corporate restructuring was nearly complete. Her personal real estate portfolio had been moved into a family-limited partnership with Michelle as a co-trustee. Her most valuable assets were protected within layers of legal entities that would be nearly impossible for Marcus to penetrate in a divorce. But the house was still a problem. Her custom-built home, the one she had designed with such care, was still a vulnerable asset. Richard Kellerman had been clear. She needed to sell it, and she needed to do it without making Marcus suspicious. She engineered it carefully. Over dinner one evening, she mentioned casually that she had been thinking about the house. "It's too big for just the 2 of us," she said, "and the maintenance costs are higher than they need to be. What would you think about downsizing? Maybe moving somewhere closer to downtown?" Marcus looked up from his plate, and for just a moment, Diane saw calculation in his eyes. He was thinking about the equity in the house, about how selling it might affect the assets he planned to claim in the divorce. But then his expression smoothed into agreement. "If that's what you want, honey," he said, "whatever makes you happy." Diane hired a luxury real estate agent who specialized in quick sales to high-net-worth buyers. She priced the house aggressively at $2.8 million, $200,000 below market value. Within 4 weeks, she had a cash offer from a tech executive relocating from California. The sale would close in 30 days. "Where will we live while we look for something new?" Marcus asked when she told him about the offer. "I've already arranged a corporate apartment downtown," Diane said smoothly. "The company is expanding into that area anyway, so it made sense to lease something in the building we're developing. We can stay there temporarily while we figure out what we want long-term." The corporate apartment was real. An elegant two-bedroom unit in a historic building that her company had recently renovated. But it was not temporary housing while they looked for a new home. It was where Diane planned to live after Marcus was gone. She had already begun moving her personal belongings there gradually, a box or two at a time, things Marcus would not notice missing. Her favorite books, her important documents, her grandmother's jewelry. She was preparing for a future he did not know was coming. The house sale closed on a Tuesday morning in April, exactly 8 months after Diane had overheard Marcus calling her a fat elephant. She signed the paperwork in her lawyer's office while Marcus was supposedly meeting with a potential client, though Vincent Harper's latest report indicated he had actually spent that morning at the condo with Ashley. The $2.8 million was deposited directly into an account that only Diane controlled, an account Marcus did not even know existed. That evening, she told Marcus they needed to start moving their belongings to the corporate apartment over the weekend. He agreed easily, probably already calculating how temporary this arrangement would be once he filed for divorce in 6 months and claimed his share of everything. What he did not know was that Diane had already moved everything that mattered to her. The apartment was fully furnished with her personal items, her clothes, her books, everything she cared about. The things remaining in the house were just furniture and household items she had no attachment to. The move happened on a Saturday. Marcus made a show of helping carry boxes, though he spent most of the day on his phone, probably texting Ashley about when they could next meet. Diane watched him perform the role of helpful husband and felt nothing but cold calculation. In 6 months, the prenuptial agreement would expire. In 6 months, he planned to file for divorce. But what Marcus did not realize was that Diane had no intention of waiting that long. She had spent 8 months building her case, 8 months of investigation, restructuring, documentation, and strategic planning. She had transformed herself from vulnerable prey into an apex predator, and Marcus had not noticed a single change because he was too busy counting money that would never be his. Vincent Harper delivered his final comprehensive report in late April. It was 237 pages of documented evidence, photographs of Marcus with Ashley spanning 22 months, credit card statements showing gambling losses totaling $187,000, bank records proving he had diverted more than $90,000 from their joint household account, copies of the fraudulent loan documents where he had forged Diane's signature to secure $520,000 using her properties as collateral, phone records showing hundreds of calls between Marcus and Linda Bradford, calls that spiked every time Diane wrote another check, financial records proving Linda had loaned Marcus $125,000 in incremental payments over 2 years. But the most damning evidence was something Vincent had uncovered through his investigation of Marcus's background before he met Diane. Marcus Bradford had done this before. Not exactly the same scheme, but close enough to show a pattern. 8 years earlier, in Atlanta, he had dated a woman named Patricia Morgan for 2 years. Patricia was 51 years old, a successful real estate broker, recently divorced, and, according to the investigative report, significantly overweight. Marcus had courted her intensely, moved in with her, and convinced her to add his name to her bank accounts and the deed to her house. Then he had cleaned out the accounts and disappeared. Patricia had filed a police report, but Marcus claimed it was a misunderstanding between romantic partners, and without clear evidence of fraud, the police had not pursued charges. Patricia had been too humiliated to push the matter further. Marcus had a type: older, successful, insecure women with money. He targeted them deliberately, identified their vulnerabilities, and exploited them with practiced precision. Diane was not his first victim. She was just his most ambitious target. And Linda Bradford had been involved in that scheme too. Vincent had found evidence that Linda had helped Marcus move money out of Patricia's accounts before he disappeared. This was not a husband who made mistakes. This was a career con artist who had been enabled by his mother for years. Diane sat in her office reading through the final report, and something inside her crystallized into absolute clarity. Marcus Bradford had built his entire life around manipulating vulnerable women. He had identified Diane's deepest insecurity and weaponized it with surgical precision. He had made her believe she was loved while counting down the days until he could rob her and humiliate her. He had forged her signature on legal documents. He had stolen from her repeatedly. He had committed fraud that could have destroyed everything she had built, and he thought he was going to get away with it. The prenuptial agreement expired in exactly 4 months. Marcus was probably already planning his exit, already fantasizing about the divorce settlement that would make him a millionaire. He had been patient for nearly 5 years, playing the role of devoted husband while secretly despising her, stealing from her, betraying her with another woman, and waiting for the moment when he could take half of everything and walk away. But Diane had been patient too, and her patience had a deadline. She scheduled a meeting with Richard Kellerman and brought Michelle Davis with her. They met in Richard's conference room on a Wednesday afternoon, and Diane laid out her complete plan. Richard reviewed Vincent Harper's investigative report, the financial documentation, the evidence of fraud, and the pattern of prior behavior with Patricia Morgan. "This changes everything," Richard said, looking up from the documents. "With this evidence, you're not just protecting assets in a divorce. You have grounds for criminal charges: forgery, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. If you wanted to, you could have him arrested." "I don't want him arrested," Diane said quietly. "I want him destroyed. I want him to have nothing. I want everyone to know what he did. I want his reputation ruined so thoroughly that he can never do this to anyone else. And I want to do it in a way that's completely legal, completely justified, and completely devastating." Richard smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Then here's what we do." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Diane would wait until the corporate restructuring was entirely complete and legally unassailable. She would ensure every asset was protected, every document was filed, every legal protection was in place. She would wait until the timing was perfect, when Marcus was least expecting it. And then she would reveal everything at once, in a manner so comprehensive and so public that he would have no opportunity to spin the narrative or claim he was being treated unfairly. She would not file for divorce before the prenup expired. She would file immediately after, within hours, so that technically the prenup was void, but practically it did not matter, because everything worth protecting would already be protected. And she would accompany the divorce filing with a lawsuit for fraud, forgery, and theft, backed by 237 pages of irrefutable evidence. Marcus would get nothing. Worse than nothing. He would be exposed, humiliated, and potentially facing criminal charges if he tried to fight back. "The key is timing," Richard explained. "We file everything simultaneously. The divorce, the fraud lawsuit. We present all the evidence at once. We serve him in a way that gives him no advance warning, no opportunity to hide assets or create a counter-narrative. And we make sure that anyone who matters, anyone he might try to manipulate or borrow money from in the future, knows exactly what he is." "What about Linda?" Michelle asked. "She's just as guilty as he is." "We include her in the fraud lawsuit," Richard said. "She knowingly participated in the scheme. She provided financial support. She conspired with her son to defraud Diane. She's liable." Over the next 3 months, Diane executed the final phases of her plan with mechanical precision. The corporate restructuring was completed. Every asset was protected within layers of legal entities that Marcus could not touch. The house money was secured. Her personal property was entirely moved to the corporate apartment. She closed the joint household account and opened a new one with minimal funds, just enough to avoid suspicion. She had her mail redirected to the office. She changed her passwords on every account. She prepared for separation with the thoroughness of someone planning a military operation. And through it all, she continued to play her role: the loving wife, the supportive partner, the woman who believed she was cherished for who she was inside. Marcus noticed nothing. He continued seeing Ashley 3 times a week. He continued gambling. He continued having long conversations with Linda behind closed doors. He continued to exist in the fantasy that everything was going according to plan, that in just a few weeks the prenup would expire and he would finally be able to claim what he believed he had earned by tolerating her for 5 years. In July, 3 weeks before their 5th anniversary, Diane had a moment of unexpected emotion. She was alone in the corporate apartment, organizing documents in preparation for what was coming, when she found their wedding album in a box she had moved months earlier. She sat on the floor and opened it, looking at photographs of a day she had believed was the happiest of her life. There was a picture of Marcus looking at her during their vows, his expression tender and sincere. Another of him placing the ring on her finger. Another of them dancing at the reception while she cried tears of joy. She remembered that day so vividly. She remembered feeling like she had finally found someone who loved her despite her flaws, someone who saw her value beyond her appearance. But that man had never existed. The Marcus in these photographs was a character he was playing, a role he had performed with Oscar-worthy skill. The real Marcus was the man she had heard on the phone, calling her a fat elephant, laughing with his mother about how disgusting she was, counting down the days until he could rob her and leave. Diane closed the album and put it back in the box. She did not cry. She had done enough crying over Marcus Bradford. Instead, she felt a cold satisfaction settle over her. In 3 weeks, the prenuptial agreement would expire. And in 3 weeks and 1 day, Marcus Bradford's carefully constructed plan would collapse around him. The 5th anniversary of their wedding fell on a Saturday in early August. Diane had suggested they spend the day quietly, just the two of them. Marcus had agreed, probably relieved that she was not planning some elaborate celebration that would require him to pretend to be a devoted husband in front of witnesses. They had dinner at home, an expensive meal Diane prepared herself. Marcus made a toast to 5 wonderful years together, and to many more to come. Diane touched her glass to his and smiled, thinking about the fact that in approximately 10 hours she was going to end his world. They went to bed at their usual time. Marcus fell asleep quickly, probably dreaming about the divorce he planned to file in a few months and the money he thought he had finally secured access to. Diane lay awake beside him, watching the digital clock on the nightstand count down the minutes until midnight. When the numbers changed from 11:59 to 12:00, they had officially been married for 5 years. The prenuptial agreement was now void. Marcus had no idea that the expiration of the prenup meant nothing anymore. Diane had spent 14 months making sure of that. She got up at 5:30 on Sunday morning, exactly as she always did. She went through her usual routine, got dressed, and instead of going to the office, as she often did on weekend mornings, she drove to Richard Kellerman's office. He was already there, along with 2 other attorneys from his firm and a process server. The divorce papers were ready. The fraud lawsuit was ready. The restraining order preventing Marcus from accessing any accounts or properties was ready. 3 thick envelopes, each containing documents that would systematically dismantle Marcus Bradford's life. But Diane had added one more element, something personal, something that would ensure Marcus understood exactly when she had discovered his betrayal and exactly how long she had been planning his destruction. She drafted 3 emails on her laptop while sitting in Richard's conference room. She would send them simultaneously at exactly 9 in the morning, time to arrive while Marcus was still at the apartment, probably sleeping off their anniversary dinner. The first email was practical and brief. The apartment lease ends today. You need to remove your belongings by 6 this evening. The new tenants take possession tomorrow morning. Do not contact me at this number. All further communication must go through my attorney, Richard Kellerman. Neat, She included Richard's contact information. The second email contained attachments. 23 photographs from Vincent Harper's investigation. Marcus and Ashley entering the condo. Marcus at the casino. Marcus meeting with the loan sharks, who thought they had Diane's properties as collateral. Marcus and Linda going through documents at her house. Each photograph was time-stamped and dated, creating an irrefutable timeline of his betrayal. The third email was the one she had revised 17 times over the past month. It was the one that mattered most, because it was not about legal strategy or financial protection. It was about making sure Marcus Bradford understood that he had been beaten at his own game by the woman he had underestimated. Marcus, it began. 14 months ago, I came home early on a Wednesday evening in October. I was walking toward our bedroom when I heard you on the phone with your mother. I stood in the hallway and listened to every word you said. I heard you call me a fat elephant. I heard you say that seeing me naked disgusts you. I heard you say you were only with me for the money. I heard you and Linda laugh about how desperate I was for love. I heard you discuss the timeline for the prenup expiring and your plan to divorce me and take half of everything I built. I heard all of it. You identified my greatest insecurity and used it as a weapon. You made me believe that someone finally loved me for who I was inside, when you were actually counting the days until you could rob me and humiliate me. You told me that what mattered was character and principles, and what was in my heart. You put your hand on my chest and made me believe I had found someone who saw my worth. It was the cruelest manipulation I have ever experienced. But you made a critical mistake, Marcus. You underestimated me. You assumed I would remain the insecure, desperate woman you married. You assumed I would never find out. You assumed that even if I did, I would be too afraid of being alone to do anything about it. For 14 months, I have been documenting everything. The affair with Ashley that has been going on for 22 months, the $187,000 in gambling debts, the $520,000 you borrowed from loan sharks using forged documents with my signature, putting my properties at risk, the $90,000 you stole from our joint account, Linda's involvement, and the $125,000 she loaned you, expecting to get it back when you divorced me. I also know about Patricia Morgan in Atlanta. I know this is what you do. You target successful women who are insecure about their appearance. You identify their vulnerabilities and exploit them. You are not a husband who made mistakes. You are a con artist, and your mother is your accomplice. The prenuptial agreement expired yesterday at midnight, but it does not matter. Every asset I own is protected. The house is sold. The company is restructured. You will receive nothing because you contributed nothing except lies and theft. The divorce papers are being served this morning along with a lawsuit for fraud, forgery, and theft. If you try to fight this, I will file criminal charges. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. You called me an elephant. You said I disgusted you. You used my insecurity as a weapon and made me believe I was loved when I was actually being robbed. But the elephant you underestimated is stronger, smarter, and more ruthless than you ever imagined. Do not contact me. Do not come to my office. Do not try to explain or apologize. There is nothing you can say that matters anymore. You and Linda played a game, and you lost. Completely. Diane read through the email one final time, then looked at Richard. Is this too much? Too emotional? It's perfect, Richard said. It shows clear intent and awareness. It documents that you knew about the fraud and took appropriate legal steps to protect yourself. And it ensures he understands that he has been outplayed. At exactly 9:00 on Sunday morning, August 8th, Diane pressed send on all 3 emails simultaneously. Then she blocked Marcus's phone number, blocked Linda's number, blocked every possible way they could contact her. Within minutes, the process server was on his way to the corporate apartment with the legal documents. Diane sat in Richard's conference room and waited. She imagined Marcus waking up, checking his phone, seeing the emails. She imagined him reading the first one and being confused, reading the second one and being shocked, reading the third one and understanding, finally, that the wife he thought was too insecure and desperate to ever challenge him had spent 14 months systematically destroying every plan he had made. Her phone, the new one Marcus did not know about, buzzed with a text from the process server at 9:37. Documents delivered. He tried to argue. Police were called to escort him from the property when he refused to leave. He has been removed. It was done. The trap she had spent 14 months building had finally been sprung. Marcus Bradford had woken up this morning thinking the prenup had expired, and his long game was finally paying off. Instead, he had discovered that he had lost everything and was facing a fraud lawsuit that could send him to prison if he fought back. The first call came at 10:15 that morning, not to Diane, but to Richard Kellerman's office. Marcus's attorney, a man named Stephen Pritchard, who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, requested an emergency meeting. Richard's response was polite but firm. "My client has provided all relevant documentation. If Mr. Bradford wishes to dispute anything in the divorce filing or the fraud lawsuit, he is welcome to do so in court. But I should warn you that we have comprehensive evidence of forgery, theft, and conspiracy. If your client contests this matter, we will pursue criminal charges." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Stephen Pritchard asked if he could review the evidence. Richard sent him a 40-page summary of Vincent Harper's investigation, including selected photographs, bank records, and copies of the forged loan documents. That was Sunday. By Monday afternoon, Stephen Pritchard called back with a very different tone. "My client would like to negotiate a settlement." "There is nothing to negotiate," Richard replied. "The prenuptial agreement was in effect during the marriage. Even though it expired technically at midnight on their anniversary, Mrs. Bradford filed for divorce within hours, and all assets were already properly protected through legitimate business restructuring completed over the past year. Mr. Bradford contributed no income to the marriage, no equity to any property, and in fact stole substantial sums from Mrs. Bradford while committing fraud in her name. He will receive nothing in the divorce. The only question is whether Mrs. Bradford chooses to file criminal charges." Another long silence. Then, what would prevent her from filing criminal charges? Mr. Bradford signing the divorce agreement without contest and leaving immediately. He also needs to resolve the fraudulent loans he took out using Mrs. Bradford's properties as collateral. Those are his debts, not hers. If those lenders come after her properties because of his fraud, she will absolutely pursue criminal prosecution. How is he supposed to resolve $520,000 in debt? That is not Mrs. Bradford's concern. Perhaps his mother can help, since she was complicit in the fraud. The call ended there. Diane listened to Richard's summary of the conversation and felt a grim satisfaction settle in her chest. Marcus was scrambling. The man who had spent nearly 5 years patiently executing his con was now desperately trying to avoid prison. But the real destruction was only beginning. Ashley Brennan, the personal trainer Marcus had been seeing for 22 months, discovered the truth on Monday evening. One of Vincent Harper's last tasks had been to document Ashley's contact information and confirm whether she knew Marcus was married. The investigation revealed she did not. Marcus had told her he was a successful property investor who traveled frequently for work. The condo he rented, the one Diane had been paying for, was supposedly his residence. Ashley thought she was dating a wealthy bachelor. Diane had debated whether to contact Ashley directly. Part of her wanted to let the woman find out on her own, wanted to let Marcus deal with that mess himself. But another part of her, the part that remembered being manipulated and lied to, could not let another woman remain in the dark about who Marcus Bradford really was. She created a new email address, one that could not be traced back to her, and sent Ashley a brief message. Marcus Bradford is married and has been for 5 years. He used his wife's money to rent the condo where he brought you. She discovered the affair and filed for divorce this weekend. I thought you deserved to know who you were really involved with. She attached 3 photographs from Vincent's investigation. Marcus and Diane's wedding photo, Marcus and Ashley entering the condo building, and a screenshot of the divorce filing that was now public record. Ashley's response came the same evening, not to Diane, but in a very public way. She showed up at the condo building where Marcus had been staying since being removed from the corporate apartment. According to the building's doorman, whom Vincent still had contact with, Ashley arrived at 7:30 in the evening and demanded to see Marcus. When he came down to the lobby, she started screaming at him in front of a dozen witnesses. She called him a liar, a fraud, a manipulator. She threw her gym bag at him. She told everyone in the lobby that he had been lying to her for nearly 2 years, that he was married, that he had been using his wife's money to pay for everything. Then Ashley did something that Marcus likely never anticipated. She posted about it on social media. Not just a vague complaint about being lied to, but a detailed account of the entire situation. She named Marcus Bradford. She explained how he had lied about being single, how he had been married the entire time they were together, how his wife was the one with money and he was just a con artist. She posted screenshots of their text conversations where he had claimed to be a successful investor. She posted a photograph of the two of them together, alongside Diane and Marcus's wedding photo, with the caption, "This is what a liar looks like. Marcus Bradford spent 2 years lying to me while being married to someone else and living off her money. If you know this man, run." The post went viral within hours. Not nationally viral, but viral enough within Charlotte's social and business communities. People shared it. They commented. They tagged Marcus in the post. Some people who knew him from his failed business ventures added their own stories of him asking for loans or investments that never materialized. Patricia Morgan, the woman from Atlanta who Marcus had scammed 8 years earlier, somehow found the post and added her own comment confirming that Marcus had done the same thing to her. By Tuesday morning, Marcus Bradford's reputation was destroyed. Not just locally, but permanently, in a way that could be found by anyone who searched his name online. Linda Bradford tried to control the narrative. She called several people in their social circle, claiming that Diane was a vindictive woman who could not handle her son wanting a divorce, that Diane was using her money to destroy a good man. But Linda made a critical mistake. She said these things to people who had already seen Ashley's viral social media post, who had already read the public divorce filing that included allegations of fraud, who had already heard through Charlotte's tight-knit business community that Marcus had forged documents and stolen money. Nobody believed Linda, and several people, including 2 women from the country club where Linda was a member, confronted her directly. One of them, a woman named Patricia Chen, whose daughter was married to an attorney, told Linda to her face that she knew Linda had been involved in the scheme, that she had loaned Marcus money expecting to get it back when he divorced Diane, and that the entire plan was morally bankrupt. The confrontation happened in the country club dining room during Sunday brunch, in front of at least 30 witnesses. Linda stopped returning calls after that. She deactivated her social media accounts. She stopped attending events where she might face public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Marcus had bigger problems than social humiliation. The loan sharks, who held $520,000 in fraudulent loans secured by Diane's properties, were not pleased to discover that the collateral was invalid. They started calling Marcus, demanding immediate repayment. When he could not pay, they threatened legal action. Marcus tried to negotiate, tried to buy time, but they had no interest in negotiation. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. Marcus went to his mother for help. According to information that eventually filtered back to Diane through her social network, Linda refused. She had already lost $125,000 on her son's failed scheme. She had been publicly humiliated at her country club. Several of her friends had stopped speaking to her. Her reputation in Charlotte's social circles was destroyed, and she blamed Marcus for all of it. If he had just waited a few more months before getting caught, if he had been more careful, if he had not been stupid enough to let Diane overhear that phone conversation, they would have succeeded. Linda told her son that she was done funding his disasters. She had no more money to give him, and even if she did, she would not waste it on a son who had ruined both their reputations. The relationship between Marcus and Linda Bradford, which had been built on mutual greed and conspiracy, collapsed completely. Linda changed her phone number and refused to see her son. Marcus was left to deal with his gambling debts, his fraudulent loans, and his destroyed reputation entirely alone. On Wednesday, 5 days after Diane had sent those 3 emails, Stephen Pritchard called Richard Kellerman again. This time, his message was simple. "My client will sign whatever you want. He just wants this to be over." The divorce agreement was straightforward. Marcus Bradford would receive 0 assets from the marriage. He would relinquish all claims to any property, any business equity, any accounts. He would accept full responsibility for all debts he had incurred, including the gambling debts and the fraudulent loans. He would sign a statement acknowledging that he had committed fraud and theft during the marriage, and in exchange, Diane would not pursue criminal charges. Marcus signed on Thursday afternoon. The divorce was finalized in record time because there was nothing to divide, nothing to argue about, nothing to negotiate. After nearly 5 years of marriage, Marcus Bradford left with nothing except $187,000 in gambling debts, $520,000 owed to loan sharks, a viral social media post documenting his lies, and a reputation so thoroughly destroyed that he could not get a job at any respectable company in Charlotte. He tried to file for bankruptcy, but the fraudulent loans complicated the process. The lenders argued that he had obtained the money through fraud and should not be allowed to discharge those debts. The bankruptcy proceedings dragged on for months. During that time, Marcus moved out of the condo he could no longer afford and into a cheap apartment in the suburbs, sharing the space with a roommate to split costs. The roommate, according to Vincent Harper's final follow-up report, kicked Marcus out after 6 weeks, when he discovered who his new roommate was and what he had done. Marcus eventually found work selling insurance, a job that paid on commission and barely covered his basic expenses. He was making minimum payments on his debts, payments that would take decades to fully resolve. He had gone from planning to be a multimillionaire to living paycheck to paycheck, from expecting to retire early on Diane's money to facing a future of permanent financial struggle. 8 months after the divorce was finalized, Diane received an update from Vincent Harper, whom she had kept on retainer for occasional follow-up information. Marcus had moved to Raleigh, 3 hours away from Charlotte, trying to escape his reputation and start over. But the viral social media post followed him. Potential employers searched his name and found it. Potential romantic partners searched his name and found it. He had tried to reinvent himself, but the internet never forgets. Linda Bradford suffered her own consequences. The country club, where she had been a member for 20 years, asked her to resign after multiple members complained about her presence. Several of her closest friends stopped inviting her to social gatherings. Her bridge club politely suggested she find a different group. She had enabled her son's criminal behavior, had actively participated in a conspiracy to defraud Diane, and had lost $125,000 in the process. Worse, she had lost her social standing, which in Linda's world was more valuable than money. The relationship between Linda and Marcus never recovered. She blamed him for the disaster, and he blamed her for refusing to help him when he needed it most. They stopped speaking entirely. The conspiracy that had seemed so clever when they whispered about it over the phone had destroyed them both. Meanwhile, Diane's life transformed in ways she had not anticipated. The divorce was finalized, the fraud was exposed, and she was free. But freedom felt strange at first. For months, she had been living two lives, playing the role of unsuspecting wife while secretly building her defense. Now there was no role to play. She could just be herself. The first thing she did was move fully into the corporate apartment, which she purchased outright and transformed into her permanent residence. She redecorated with furniture she chose herself, art she actually liked, colors that made her happy. She had spent years in the house she designed, trying to create a space Marcus would be comfortable in, trying to be the wife he wanted. Now she created a space that was entirely hers. The second thing she did was start therapy, not because anyone told her she needed it, but because she wanted to process what had happened. She wanted to understand how she had been manipulated, how her own insecurities had been used against her, how to recognize those patterns so they could never happen again. Her therapist, a woman named Dr. Sandra Morrison, helped her understand that Marcus had not been able to manipulate her because she was weak. He had been able to manipulate her because she was human, because she wanted love, because she trusted someone who had deliberately earned that trust in order to exploit it. "You are not stupid for believing him," Dr. Morrison told her during one session. "You are human, and the fact that you discovered the truth and protected yourself shows remarkable strength and intelligence." The third thing Diane did was focus on her business with renewed energy. Vance Property Development had continued operating successfully throughout the past year, but Diane had been distracted by the need to protect her assets and plan her divorce. Now, with that threat eliminated, she could focus entirely on growth. She and Michelle expanded the company, hiring 15 new employees over 6 months. They opened a second office in Raleigh to manage projects in the Research Triangle area. They secured contracts for 3 major mixed-use developments. Within 8 months of the divorce being finalized, Vance Property Development's revenue had increased by 35%. Diane's personal net worth grew by $3.2 million. In November, Charlotte Business Journal featured Diane in a cover story about successful women entrepreneurs in commercial real estate. The article discussed her business philosophy, her commitment to community-focused development, and her company's impressive growth. It mentioned, briefly and factually, that she had recently gone through a divorce, but focused primarily on her professional achievements. When the article was published, Diane received dozens of emails from other businesswomen sharing their own stories of overcoming personal challenges while building careers. Several mentioned they had been following her story through the social media rumors and wanted her to know they admired her strength. The fourth thing Diane did, 6 months after the divorce, was join a fitness studio. Not because she wanted to change her appearance to please anyone else, but because she wanted to feel strong. She hired a personal trainer named Jessica Chen, a woman in her 40s who specialized in strength training for women who had never been athletic. Jessica did not talk about weight loss or how Diane looked. She talked about what Diane's body could do, about building muscle, about feeling powerful. "Strong is a feeling," Jessica told her during their first session. "It has nothing to do with what you look like and everything to do with what you can do." Diane started training 3 times a week. She learned to lift weights, to do exercises she had never thought she was capable of. And Jessica was right. Strong was a feeling. It was not about her appearance. It was about walking through the world knowing her body could support her, could carry her, could do difficult things. The fifth thing Diane did was reconnect with old friends. During her marriage to Marcus, she had slowly drifted away from several close friendships. Not because Marcus explicitly isolated her, but because she had poured so much energy into being the perfect wife, into making her marriage work, into proving she was worthy of love. Now she reached out to people she had not spoken to in years. Some of those friendships rekindled easily. Others had faded too far to revive. But she rebuilt a social life that was genuine, that was based on who she actually was rather than who she thought she needed to be. By the following spring, Nearly a year after sending those 3 emails that destroyed Marcus Bradford's plans, Diane was flourishing in ways she had never imagined possible. Her business was thriving. Her personal life was rich with genuine friendships. Her relationship with herself had fundamentally changed. She was sitting in her office one afternoon when Michelle knocked on her door. "I have something to show you," Michelle said, placing a magazine on Diane's desk. It was a regional business publication featuring their company's latest project, a mixed-use development that had transformed a struggling neighborhood into a vibrant community space. The article praised Vance Property Development's approach to ethical development and community engagement. Diane looked at the magazine and felt something unexpected. Not pride in response to external validation, but satisfaction in the work itself. She had built something meaningful, something that mattered beyond profit margins, and she had protected it from someone who wanted to steal it. "We did good work," Diane said quietly. "We did," Michelle agreed, "and you were incredibly brave." Diane thought about that word, brave. She had not felt brave when she stood in the hallway and heard Marcus call her an elephant. She had felt destroyed, but she had made a choice in that moment. She had chosen to be strategic rather than emotional. She had chosen to protect herself rather than confront him immediately. She had chosen to be patient and thorough, and those choices had saved everything she had built. 1 year and 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Diane received an unexpected message. It came through LinkedIn, of all places, from a woman named Jennifer Walsh. The message was brief, but caught Diane's attention immediately. "Ms. Vance, I hope this message doesn't seem intrusive. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a family law attorney in Atlanta. I recently represented a client in a case that had disturbing similarities to what I understand happened in your marriage. I've been researching Marcus Bradford's history, and I believe there may be other victims beyond you and Patricia Morgan. Would you be willing to speak with me? I think we might be able to help prevent this from happening to other women." Diane stared at the message for a long moment. She had spent over a year trying to move forward, trying not to think about Marcus or what he had done. But the idea that there might be other women he had targeted, other victims who had not discovered the truth in time to protect themselves, made her feel something she had not expected. Responsibility. She agreed to meet Jennifer Walsh for coffee the following week. Jennifer turned out to be a sharp woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She explained that her client, a woman named Rebecca Martinez, had dated Marcus for 8 months before discovering he had lied about nearly everything in his life. Rebecca had not lost money because she had caught on quickly, but Jennifer's investigation had revealed a pattern stretching back further than anyone had realized. "I found evidence of at least 5 women Marcus targeted over the past 12 years, Jennifer explained, pulling out a folder of documentation. "Patricia Morgan in Atlanta, who you already know about. A woman named Susan Chen in Charleston, who lost $45,000. Another woman in Savannah named Maria Lopez, who caught him before he could take anything substantial. Rebecca in Atlanta, who ended things when she realized he was lying. And you. Those are just the ones I've been able to confirm. I suspect there are more who never reported it because they were too embarrassed, or because Marcus was careful enough to keep his theft below the threshold for criminal prosecution." Diane listened, feeling a cold anger settle in her chest. She had thought Marcus was just a con artist who targeted vulnerable women for money. But this was something more systematic, more predatory. He had been doing this for over a decade, moving from city to city, targeting women with a specific profile, exploiting their insecurities, and moving on before they could fully comprehend what had happened. "What can we do?" Diane asked. "I'm working with a journalist who specializes in investigative reporting on fraud. She wants to write a comprehensive article about Marcus Bradford's pattern of behavior. It would include interviews with victims willing to speak publicly, documentation of the pattern, and information that would make it much harder for him to target anyone else in the future." Would you be willing to participate? Diane thought about it. Part of her wanted to leave the past behind, to focus on her present and future rather than revisiting the pain of what Marcus had done. But another part of her, the part that had received those emails from other businesswomen after the Charlotte Business Journal article, understood that her story had power. It could warn others. It could prevent future victims. Yes, she said, I'll participate. The article was published 6 months later in a major investigative journalism outlet with national reach. It was titled, "The Serial Con Artist Who Targeted Successful Women's Insecurities." The piece was comprehensive and devastating. It documented Marcus Bradford's 12-year pattern of targeting older, successful women who were insecure about their appearance. It explained his methods in clinical detail, how he identified vulnerabilities, how he built trust, how he manipulated emotions, and how he extracted money. It included interviews with 4 of his victims, including Diane and Patricia Morgan. It included documentation of his fraudulent loans, his gambling addiction, and Linda Bradford's role as enabler and co-conspirator. The article went viral, not in a sensational way, but in a way that mattered. It was shared in business communities, in women's professional networks, in divorce support groups. It became a case study in how intelligent, successful people can be manipulated by skilled con artists who understand human psychology. Several universities included it in their courses on fraud and manipulation. Multiple women's organizations reached out to Diane asking her to speak about recognizing manipulation in relationships. Marcus Bradford tried to respond to the article, claiming he was being unfairly characterized, that the women were bitter ex-partners, that he had made mistakes, but was not a criminal. But his response only made things worse. The evidence was too comprehensive, the pattern too clear, the victims too credible. His attempted defense came across as exactly what it was, a desperate attempt to salvage a reputation that was already destroyed beyond repair. The article had real consequences. Several law firms that had been considering hiring Marcus for administrative positions rescinded their offers after reading it. A woman in Florida who had recently started dating someone named Marcus Bradford found the article through a basic internet search and ended the relationship immediately when she realized his patterns matched what was described. The article became a permanent record, easily findable, impossible to escape. Linda Bradford suffered her own reckoning. The article included details of her involvement, her financial support of Marcus's schemes, her participation in planning the fraud against Diane. Several members of her extended family stopped speaking to her after reading it. Her other son, Marcus's younger brother, who had not been involved in the schemes, publicly distanced himself from both his mother and brother. But the most significant impact of the article was not what it did to Marcus and Linda. It was what it did for the victims. Patricia Morgan, who had spent 8 years feeling ashamed and humiliated, found validation in seeing her experience documented as part of a larger pattern. She was not stupid for trusting Marcus. She had been targeted by someone who was skilled at manipulation. Susan Chen from Charleston, who had never reported what happened because she felt too embarrassed, found the courage to file a police report after the article was published. Maria Lopez started a support group for women who had been victims of financial fraud in romantic relationships. And Diane found something unexpected: closure. Not because Marcus had been punished, though he had been. Not because the truth was public, though it was. But because she understood, finally and completely, that what happened to her was not her fault. She had not been victimized because she was unlovable, or because her insecurities made her weak. She had been victimized because someone had deliberately identified those insecurities and weaponized them with criminal intent. 2 months after the article was published, Diane was invited to speak at a conference for women entrepreneurs about building successful businesses. The organizers asked if she would be willing to also speak briefly about recognizing manipulation and protecting yourself from fraud in business and personal relationships. She agreed. Standing on stage in front of 300 women, Diane told her story. Not in exhaustive detail, but in broad strokes that made the lessons clear. She talked about how Marcus had identified her vulnerability and exploited it. She talked about the moment she overheard that phone conversation and how she had made a choice in that moment to be strategic rather than emotional. She talked about the 14 months she spent documenting everything, protecting her assets, and building an impenetrable legal case. She talked about how the best revenge was not destroying him, though that had happened, but becoming so completely herself that he became irrelevant. When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. But what stayed with Diane was what happened after. Women approached her throughout the rest of the conference. They shared their own stories of manipulation, of betrayal, of having their vulnerabilities used against them. They thanked her for being willing to speak publicly about something so personal and painful. Several women told her that hearing her story had helped them recognize manipulation in their own relationships. One woman said that Diane's story had given her the courage to leave a marriage where she was being financially exploited. That evening, sitting alone in her hotel room, Diane reflected on how far she had traveled from that night in the hallway when she had overheard Marcus calling her a fat elephant. She thought about the woman she had been then, the woman who believed she was unlovable because of her appearance, the woman who was so grateful for scraps of affection that she had ignored every warning sign. That woman did not exist anymore. Not because Diane had changed her appearance, though she was stronger and healthier than she had ever been. Not because she had lost weight or conformed to some standard of beauty, though her relationship with her body had fundamentally transformed. But because she had learned that her worth was not determined by whether someone found her attractive. Her worth was intrinsic, built on her intelligence, her strength, her character, her achievements, and her capacity for growth. She had built a $12 million company from a $75,000 inheritance. She had survived a 5-year con designed to rob her of everything. She had protected her assets with strategic brilliance. She had exposed a predator and potentially saved other women from becoming his victims. She had rebuilt her life into something richer and more authentic than it had been before. And she had learned the most important lesson of all. The cruelest manipulation is when someone identifies your deepest insecurity and makes you believe they are the only person who can see past it, when in reality, they are the one using it as a weapon. 6 months later, Diane was featured in another article, this time in a national business magazine. The piece was about women who had built successful companies in male-dominated industries. The interview focused on her business philosophy, her approach to community development, and her plans for future expansion. The journalist asked, almost as an afterthought, about the divorce and the subsequent investigative article. "That must have been a difficult time," the journalist said. "How did you get through it?" Diane thought about the question carefully before answering. "I realized that the narrative I had been telling myself about my life was wrong. I thought I was unlovable because of how I looked. I thought I needed someone to validate my worth. But the truth is, I had already proven my worth through everything I had built. I just needed to recognize it myself. What Marcus did was terrible, but it also freed me from the belief that I needed external validation to be valuable. I had always been valuable. I just needed to believe it." The journalist smiled. "That's a powerful realization." "Yes," Diane said quietly, "it is." The article was published in March, almost exactly 2 years after Diane had sent those 3 emails that destroyed Marcus Bradford's plans. The magazine used a professional photograph of Diane in her office, wearing a red dress that she loved, her expression confident and serene. She looked like exactly what she was, a successful entrepreneur who had overcome significant challenges and emerged stronger. When the magazine hit newsstands, Diane received hundreds of messages from former colleagues, from business contacts, from women she had never met who wanted to share their own stories, or simply say, "Thank you for being visible and vulnerable." One message stood out, though. It was from Patricia Morgan, the woman from Atlanta who had been Marcus's victim 8 years earlier. "Diane," the message read, "I never properly thanked you. When I went through what happened with Marcus, I felt so alone and ashamed. I thought I was the only one stupid enough to fall for his lies. But your willingness to speak publicly about what happened, to name the manipulation for what it was, gave me permission to stop blaming myself. You helped me understand that I was not weak or stupid. I was targeted. There is a difference. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. You saved me from years of unnecessary shame. I hope you know how many women you have helped." Diane read the message 3 times, feeling tears slide down her cheeks. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude and purpose. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something that helped others. That felt meaningful in a way that simply being successful in business never quite had. That evening, Diane had dinner with Michelle at their favorite restaurant in downtown Charlotte. They sat at a table by the window, watching the city lights reflect off the buildings Diane's company had helped develop. They talked about work, about the new projects they were planning, about the team they had built. Then Michelle raised her glass. "To surviving," Michelle said. Diane smiled and shook her head. "No, to thriving." They touched glasses, and Diane took a sip of wine, savoring the moment. She thought about Marcus Bradford, probably still struggling to pay off his debts, still trying to escape the reputation that followed him everywhere, still dealing with the consequences of underestimating the woman he had called a fat elephant. She thought about Linda Bradford, isolated and alone, having lost her social standing and her relationship with her son because of greed. She thought about how their careful plan had collapsed around them when they discovered that the victim they had chosen was smarter, stronger, and more ruthless than they had ever imagined. But mostly, Diane thought about herself, about the woman she had been, so desperate for love that she had ignored every warning sign, about the woman she had become, confident in her worth, successful in her career, surrounded by genuine friendships, and completely free. Marcus had called her an elephant. He had used her greatest insecurity as a weapon. He had tried to steal everything she had built, but he had failed, because the elephant he underestimated had been stronger than he ever imagined. And that elephant had trampled his plans into dust while building an empire he could never touch. Diane looked at her reflection in the restaurant window, and for the first time in her entire life, she saw exactly what she was: powerful, resilient, brilliant, and utterly unbreakable. The insecurity that had haunted her since she was 13 years old, that had made her believe she needed someone else's validation to be worthwhile, was gone. Not because she had changed her appearance, but because she had finally understood that her worth had never been about how she looked. She had spent 37 years believing she was unlovable. She had spent 5 years being manipulated by someone who had identified that belief and exploited it. But she had spent the last 2 years learning the most important truth of all. She had always been worthy of love, respect, and success. She had just needed to believe it herself. And now she did. The elephant that Marcus Bradford had mocked, the woman he had called disgusting, the wife he had planned to rob and discard, had not just survived. She had transformed into something magnificent. She had built a thriving business. She had exposed a predator. She had helped other victims find their voices. She had created a life so rich and authentic that the man who had betrayed her was nothing more than a cautionary tale she sometimes told to help others. As Diane walked out of the restaurant that evening, she felt something settle in her chest. Peace, wholeness, strength. She was not the woman Marcus had married, the woman who believed she needed his validation to be worthwhile. She was someone entirely different now, someone who knew her value, someone who would never again mistake manipulation for love or desperation for devotion. Marcus Bradford had tried to destroy her. Instead, he had freed her. And the woman who emerged from that betrayal was unstoppable. The fat elephant he had mocked was living her best life, thriving, powerful, free, and she had never felt more beautiful. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.